Again, thank you everybody for attending the webinar and participating. Please use the chat to ask your questions. And if you have a need to, you know, to unmute your microphone, let me know and I'll see, I'll do that when we get time for questions. We decided to do this webinar really around the idea of how to help universities to be compliant with open data requirements from funders. And so in doing so, we sought out some people who can help us talk to where we can learn from in their experience. And Utah State University here in the US is one of those examples. And so Kevin Peterson and Betty Rozum will be sharing a little bit about their policy and their practices in trying to help faculty become more compliant in open data requirements from all different kind of funders. Newby is also going to share a little bit about PUSH, because even though PUSH is hosting this webinar, many of you may not understand or know what PUSH is. So Kara's going to start us off with that. And Jamie Adams was planning on sharing a little bit from a funder's perspective on why federal federal agencies, particularly U.S. federal agencies, are requiring open data. But unfortunately, she is furloughed, and so she will not be able to share that perspective directly, but we will try to attempt to look a little bit at what they are considering around open data. My name is Adrian, and I'm your host today, and I'm with Auburn University and the PUSH Network. And we're going to get started with Kara and sharing a little bit about PUSH.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so I just wanted to really briefly explain what PUSH is here at Auburn University. So at Auburn University, we have started the Hunger Solutions Institute, and there's kind of three pieces that go along with that. The first is End Child Hunger in Alabama, and this is really specific to some of the work that's being done here in Alabama. There's also Universities Fighting World Hunger, and this is a grassroots student-led organization. We have affiliates all over the world, mostly here in the United States, but some international students who are doing things like advocacy and fundraising and scholarship towards helping to solve and fight hunger. And then the final piece is what we're here today talking about, PUSH, Presidents United to Solve Hunger. And can you go to the next slide, please? So PUSH is an international consortium of universities who are collectively trying to end hunger and poverty. So PUSH is a collective agreement by university presidents who have agreed to make hunger and fighting hunger a priority on their campus through research, instruction, student engagement, and outreach. And today, I think we have 103 university presidents who have signed on. Those are presidents from here in the United States, but also abroad. And so there's no, at this time, there's no financial commitment. There's no, it's a little less than like a binding contract, but it's just an acknowledgement by the president to say, yes, this is something that we care about. This is something that we want to work towards. And so one of the projects that that we have been working on as a network is partnering with GoDan, which I think Anne is going to explain a little bit about. And one of the projects we worked on was this study to look at universities and look at compliance with open data. And if you're interested in learning more about PUSH, here's our website, pushtosign.org. And if you're interested in how your university can become a PUSH university, please contact me and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, Kara. I appreciate that. And Also, her email address and my email address are listed. So if you're really interested in learning more, check out the website, but also feel free to email Kara about the Push Network. So Kara mentioned that with partnership with GoDan, Push conducted a study of the Push universities at the time, and there were 99 universities when we did the study. We looked on at their websites and looked for online policies around open access and open data. And then we also interviewed several representatives from several universities and in their practices of open access and practices and policies of open access and open data. And you can look at the report, it's on our website, and find a lot of the details in that we're looking for. But bottom line is schools, universities just don't have open data policies, particularly just in general. And that the open data and data management planning is driven by the funders' requirements. And so that's the reason for this webinar, is to find out how universities can be compliant with those funders' requirements. And so one of the things we did with the study is we compared our findings with a study that GoDan conducted when they were looking at funders around in their perspective on open data, and also those researchers who were receiving those funds. And we found several similarities, but in general, the grantees and researchers struggle to ensure data quality over time, and particularly when they are sharing it. They struggle with effective data management, again, thinking along the lines of sharing, and also how to be responsible in data reuse, and allowing responsible reuse. There's also a lack of budgeting and a lack of clear directives on how and where to publish data. And we also found that there were differences among the academic disciplines as to how well researchers, or how many opportunities researchers have in sharing their data, and even the support that goes along with that. So again, that's kind of the impetus as to why we are doing this webinar. But before we get started, we really need to clear up some of the definitions of open access and open data. In particular, we're looking at data in research data, but this could also mean government data and that sort of thing. But the bottom line is open data is the data that can be accessed and reused and made available in a way that machines can read it, and interchange it. And so and with that are the licenses and the opportunity for reuse. And this is the part that we really wanted Jamie Adams with USDA to share, is kind of the background in why funders are requiring open data. And it's about an opportunity. The data is there, and there are opportunities that can arise when it is shared. And particularly, it can speed research and innovation, and it can provide opportunities for other applications. Like when we think about all the weather data that we have today, we have the weather applications on our cell phones, and then there are all kinds of applications in agriculture that are being produced because that data is open. And that same sort of thing is, how can we utilize research in that same way? The other thing is, with data that's being shared, researchers then have more opportunities for collaboration, and also the idea of openly sharing data, and people being able to use it and reuse it can provide solutions for many wicked problems or very difficult, complex problems that are no really readable solutions right now. And so that's kind of the reasoning that we're finding from the funders. Um, and one other thing about open access and open data is that those terms get reused or not reused, used interchangeably. And we do make a distinction between open access and open data. And really the data is there so that it can be reused in not only by people, but also by machines. The in the US, this really became a bigger issue for many academic and research disciplines when there was an executive order and a memo in 2013 that said that federal agencies should be requiring open access and open data. And what we're finding and what we hear from researchers and from universities is that the federal agencies really look at these requirements in different ways. Some of them are much further along in requiring open data and than others. And that also goes along with some of the academic disciplines are more mature in their support for open data. And one thing that I found out in the last couple of days, particularly USDA intends to complete a USDA policy that aligns their agency data because right now, even within the agency, there seems to be quite a bit of difference in the requirements of open data. And this is one reason that we have now Betty and Kevin from Utah State, because we want them to tell us a little bit about how they are approaching this idea of being compliant with these open data requirements. So Betty, I'm going to unshare my screen and then get you where you can share yours.
Okay.
Great. That looks great. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Betty Rozum from Utah State University, and Kevin is here with me. And we're delighted to be here to talk to you about what we've been doing at Utah State University, and hopefully this will provide some insight to you about, or give you some ideas about some things that might work for you or might not. So the first thing we're going to address is some of the challenges that people face with open data. And I have a uniquely academic university experience, so that's the position that I'll be talking from. And I think the biggest one is time and money. It takes a lot of time to make data open. It takes time to document data appropriately so that it can be open, reused, available to others, not just today and tomorrow, but we think about this, especially librarians. I'm a data librarian, 20, 30, 50 years down the road. And doing this for a researcher and teaching researchers how to do this and appropriately document and share it is time consuming. And you have to consider that in academia, faculty have a lot of other responsibilities and pressures on their time. They're teaching, they have committee work, they're mentoring students. So this is a big challenge right there. There's a cost of repositories. In academia, if you have a repository at your institution, there's a cost to maintain that and staff it. If you're depositing it to another repository, many of those don't have a cost to deposit for the end user, but someone's paying that cost somewhere. There is a cost somewhere to maintain a repository and deposit that data. So we have to bear in mind that this isn't free to keep that data open and accessible. Another challenge that I have seen, especially here on our campus, is fear. There's an attitude of fear. A lot of people are afraid that if they make their data available, especially if they make it available what they think in their mind is prematurely, they're going to be scooped. They're not sure that if I release my data at this time, somebody's going to grab that data, publish on their research, and get credit for the work that they've been doing. So it's kind of scary to them to do that. They're also afraid that you know, they should know what they're doing. They should know how to do this. It's this kind of fear of, I'm not sure how to document this, and I'm afraid I'm going to look kind of silly if I have to ask for help. So you have to kind of tread gently, tread lightly in explaining to people, you know, it's okay. This is new for a lot of people, and you know, I'm here to help you. There's someone here who's going to show you how to do this. And some people are just flat out unwilling. You know, I don't want to share my data. I don't want to share it. It's not anyone's but mine. So there's attitude challenges that we face in open data. And then just a sense of uncertainty. I think Anne mentioned this, and I know that Kevin and I and the folks in Kevin's office have experienced this difficulty in understanding expectation of funders. And even within one funder, such as the USDA, some branches of the USDA expect your data to be handled one way, another branch wants it handled a different way. So different funders, USDA, National Science Foundation, National Institute of Health, understanding who wants what handled which way. And some of our researchers at USU will have multiple awards through different agencies. And so they have to keep that straight and know what to do with their data for each different funder. That's a lot. That's a lot for them. That's a lot for us at the institution to keep track of and to understand. So keeping on top of that, helping people navigate that is a challenge. When you couple that with the expectations of journals to know which journals are going to require data deposit, where does it have to be deposited, how does it have to be deposited, making data open in that manner, it becomes a little bit overwhelming. And then there's rules. You know, how do you format data for this? How do you format data for that? How do you know what you're supposed to do? You know, and it changes. What about the protection of data? Is it okay to release it? Do you have human subjects data? Do you have data that's related to a sensitive population, whether it's a human population, a protected species, fossils? So all of these issues here are challenges that our researchers, our faculty, our institution, our data librarians that we grapple with, you know, every day. So it can make it a little bit, you know, it makes it interesting, actually. I find a lot of this interesting to come up with ways to figure out, well, how are we gonna handle this? And often, you know, most of these things, we're facing these without any increase in staff. A lot of, in the United States, a lot of us call this an unfunded mandate to make this happen, because this is coming and we're not seeing an influx of funding for any of us to address this. So, you know, we have all of these challenges, and we have that mandate that Anne mentioned, the mandate to make data open. So what we thought we would talk about today is, and our goal to hopefully you'll walk away with this, is that, you know, what was our process, to kind of map out our process and give you a sense of the timeline that we follow to make that happen. What are the accomplishments? What have we managed to do? What are our challenges? Because it's gone fairly well, but you know, it's not without its challenges for us. And what are the initial incomes? There has been no income. Let's be really clear on that. What are our outcomes, and then what lies ahead? So Anne already talked about the executive order that was released in 2013. So any federal agency with over 100 million in research and development expenditures had to develop a plan that was going to make publications and data that resulted from federally funded research freely available to the public. And for those of you who have familiarized yourselves with this, there's a bit more to that. Freely available and accessible. So you also have to be able to discover it, which is kind of a key part to this memo. So when this came out at USU, you know, this really kind of jump-started things. Before this, there were some agencies that had been working to make data available. NSF and NIH, the National Science Foundation, National Institute of Health, had already had data sharing plans, data management plans, and been working to make data more open. But there wasn't a lot of teeth to it. There wasn't a lot of, you know, what's going to happen. There wasn't this feel of the whole weight of the federal government behind it saying, you know, wow, you really have to do this. And so before that, the library at our institution had been working to say, well, we'll answer questions about how to write a data management plan. We had partnered with the research office to acquire the data management, the DMP tool, data management plan tool. We had kind of said, well, people had questions. We could say, you know, we could offer help on how to do some very, very, very basic data management planning, but it was pretty minimal. When this memo hit, though, we all kind of realized we were going to need to do a little bit more. We're going to have to step up to the plate, so to speak. So we knew as a campus that we're going to have to come up with some way to facilitate access to data and provide support to researchers as they work to meet the requirements of the mandate. And also ensure that the university could show that, hey, you know, we're in compliance. So we knew that we had some work cut out for us. So we kind of had an idea of where we needed to go. We knew we needed to do something. I'm sure most institutions knew they needed to do something. So what we did is we kind of had this roadmap. So the first thing we did was the provost and of the university and the dean of the library created a position, a data library position. That was my position in 2015. And then we decided that there was a need to bring the people on campus together who are really going to be involved in this. We need to get the stakeholders together. And we knew we would need some sort of campus policy that would document and describe research data, because we lack that. And then finally, there was going to be, in order to show that USU was making a concerted effort to support researchers in providing access to their federally funded research data. We needed to somehow come up with some kind of process to do that and to create auditable records to the research data publications that they had. So we couldn't just say, yeah, you know, they have a federal award that falls under one of these agencies, and yes, you know, they're making their data open. We wanted to be able to say, we're doing everything we can to ensure that the terms of these mandates are being met. So that was our kind of our broad strokes of our roadmap, but we also had to make sure that this happened. So this was our timeline. In summer of 2015, my position was created. I worked here already. I just moved from an administrative position in the library to this position. And then in the fall, we created the task force. We identified the people who should serve on it, and we created it. And then 1 year later, we had our solution implemented. That was really fast. I sometimes look back on that and I think, wow, you know, how we do that? I'm not, it's because of Kevin, really. So our stakeholders, we sat down and we thought, well, who's involved in this? Well, the research office, of course, right? And the library was involved because we had decided at some point the library would be sort of the outreach, the face of data. And that was determined for a couple of reasons. The library is uniquely positioned to reach out to the faculty on campus because we already have a program in place here where librarians have contacts with every academic department on campus. We have librarians assigned to those departments. Faculty are accustomed to having a librarian speak to them. We have ways to reach out to those departments. So they're kind of used to that. Another reason is data librarianship is, a field. So it's something that's, normal that we do, where we know how to curate data, we know how to manage it, we know how to describe it, we know how to, that's kind of what we do. So it seemed like that was really smart. Information technology, because we're going to have huge amounts of data that we have to figure out a way to manage, move, transfer, what to do with it. And then of course, the faculty, our researchers. So those were the people we gathered together. We brought them together, and within a year, we had a solution that was conceptualized, developed, and formally implemented. And how did we do that in a year? I really think, and Kevin can argue with me, but I think the reason we did this is we had this really big group. I think there were maybe 15 or so of us, and we met bi-monthly. But what we did is we took this smaller group, much smaller group, and we met frequently. So once we conceptualized what we needed to do, we took a small group and we met really frequently. And that small group, we're the ones who really did the work. So the big group, we'd come back to the big group and say, okay, this is what we're doing, any concerns or ideas, or, we get feedback. But the small group, we were really nimble. And we worked really, really well together. And we just pounded this out. We just worked really quickly. And the small group had the people who knew what to do, knew what had to be done, and could just do it. So if anyone is considering doing something similar to this, I really would urge you to consider breaking into a smaller group like that, because you get so much more done, so much more quickly.
Yeah, I agree. I think having the smaller group is what enabled us to go from nothing to something within a year. I think if we would have tried to do what we did in the smaller group and the larger group and not have a smaller group, I think it would have been a longer process, and we probably wouldn't have been able to go from nothing to something in the time frame we did. And as Betty said, we had representatives from the larger group in the smaller group. We just had fewer people doing it. And we all had a different approach as to what would be the best process for Utah State University. But by having those key stakeholders represented in the smaller group, I think we were all able to learn a little bit more about what each office does. So I'm in the Sponsor Programs Office, which is a division of the Office of Research, and Betty's in the library. And prior to this small task group, we really didn't have a lot of interaction. And I wasn't quite sure what the library did in terms of data management and open access. So I think by first getting together in a small group, understanding what each office represented in that small group does, helped us foster this team attitude of teamwork where, okay, so this is what you guys do. This is what I do. I think this is how we can work together to come up with a solution. And I ultimately think that's why we were able to go from nothing to something in a quicker than expected time frame.
And also doing that built this teamwork and that continues on. I mean, we talk all the time. So this is a campus issue. This is not something that's owned by one group. There's stakeholders for a reason. We're all involved. Not one group can solve this issue. Open data belongs to everyone. It belongs to the funders. It belongs to the research office. It belongs to the library. It belongs to the users. So we all have to take a piece of this and carry our weight. So unless we work together, we're not going to be able to really make a difference in getting this done. So I think finding your stakeholders and really talking with them and working with them collaboratively is just essential. That, I think that is why we've been able to get so much done. So I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we needed was a policy, a research data policy, because we didn't have anything that described what research data was at USU. And we didn't have anything that could tell a faculty member or researcher, what their responsibilities were, that they were expected to share their research, what the responsibility of the institution was, what happens when a researcher leaves the institution and goes somewhere else, what do they take their data with them? So that was really pretty important about that. So we developed this policy, and I have a link at the end of the slide that you can read this, that'll point to this policy if you want to read it. So this was really an important step to do, and it had a couple of benefits immediately after and ongoing. And one of them that I think right after we completed this policy is that we socialized it. The vice president for research went around with, and I can't remember who he took with him, but he went to each college and talked about this research policy. Of course, it went through our faculty senate and other avenues as well. But he talked to faculty about this policy and what it was and why it mattered. And that enabled us to raise awareness of these issues on campus. And although that was sort of a one-time only opportunity, having that policy now allows us to point to it and say, when faculty come in, if we're doing a new orientation, or if I have a faculty member who has a question, I can say, well, here's this policy. You can read this policy. This will state what our expectations are. And included in that is the expectation that you make your data open. The expectation that you make your data as open as possible, that USU is in harmony with the OSTP memo, that you are expected to put your data in a repository, a domain-specific repository, or our institutional repository. So this was an important step for us to get done. And I think it's really helped state that open data is something that we value at the university. And then, of course, facilitating the funder compliance, because that's the whole root of making data open. So in order to do this, and this, this is like, what, 3 points? But I mean, these 3 points took us a year to do. So yeah, just three points, but it took us a whole year. And Kevin's going to spend some time going through this whole process. So I'm going to turn over to him in just a minute here. But this was our goal in developing this process. We wanted to be able to demonstrate to our funders that USU is making a good faith effort to comply. So at any point in time, if somebody came to us and said, hey, yo, NIH here, what you got going? Where's your data? Where's your publications? We wanted to be able to say, here's what we're doing. Here's the publications associated with NIH grants. Here's where the data is deposited associated with those awards. We also wanted to be able to tell researchers that complying with funder mandates is an institutional priority, that USU thinks this is important. And so in our process, as you'll see, they get this message several times that, yes, USU expects you to do this. Yes, you need to do this. Yes, you need to make sure you're following up with the expectations of your funder. And so, part of this is done through our policy 558 research data. And part of it is done through this process that researchers understand that, you have to do this. And finally, and I think in some ways, maybe most importantly, in part because of those challenges to making data open that I talked to at the beginning. Demonstrate to our researchers that resources are available to them, to help them, to support them in meeting funder mandates. Now, this is a big shift for many researchers. They have a lot of questions. You know, what data do I have to make open? How do I make it open? How do I describe it? Oh no, what do I do? How do I get this done? And so we have a big messaging, schema that says, you're not alone. There's help. They're always told there's help. There's help. There's help. You can do this. There's someone who will help you. So they're never left with this sense of you're in this by yourself. So that's kind of the core of our program. And I think it's Kevin's turn.
Thanks, Betty. Well, as Betty indicated, what we wanted to stress to faculty is that, you are not alone when it comes to complying with a sponsor or funder mandate. We have resources available here on campus to assist you to help ease the burden that many researchers face. A little bit about my office. My office is the Sponsor Programs Office. We're a division in the Office of Research at Utah State. My office is responsible for reviewing proposals for grant or contract submissions, submitting those proposals, and then if a proposal is awarded, we set up the award or negotiate the award, and then we assist with various compliance requirements that a funder places on that funding. One of those requirements being that of open access and data management. Our process really is fairly simple. We have a link to an article we wrote that will go through our process a little more in depth, and that link is at the end of our slide presentation, I believe. But I'm just going to give a brief overview of our process. There's nothing really earth-shattering, but it's centered in good communication. Prior to implementing this process, there wasn't as frequent conversation with the library and the Office of Research and the researcher in terms of data management. But as we came up with this process, we realized that we need to foster that. So it's part of the culture here at Utah State that people recognize that data management isn't just the responsibility of the researcher, but there are resources on campus who also shoulder some of that responsibility to assist the researcher. So our process is rooted in communication between my team in sponsor programs, Betty in the library, as well as the researcher, the person who is receiving the funding. So as Betty mentioned earlier, one of the challenges we did face was we weren't given any existing resources or given additional resources or funding to better comply with the sponsor mandates in terms of data management and open access. So we had to use existing resources on campus. So when we met as a small group, one of the first things we did is we shared what resources are available in our respective offices to potentially assist faculty or researchers with their data management obligations. In my office, we use what's called the Quality Grants Management Software System. It's primarily a proposal submission system and an award database system. But within Quality, we found certain fields that we could populate to help manage reports, to upload relevant documents such as a data management plan, or what we'll talk about in a little bit, an internal document that we use to assist with data management obligations called a primary metadata document. And Betty educated me and others in the Office of Research about Digital Commons at Utah State University, which is basically an institutional repository that is used, as well as the library catalog. So we each, in that small group, we met and discussed what systems we have and how we could utilize those systems to assist faculty. So here's just a brief overview of our process. So when a proposal is funded, really that's when the process of tracking compliance begins. Staff in my office, before they set up an award, will send an email to the faculty member who has received the award, and we'll copy Betty on that email. What we've developed are some email templates, so they're pretty standard. Every time a faculty receives a federally sponsored award where there are open access and data management requirements, they'll receive that same initial email with just some information changed related to identify the new award that they've received. As part of that email, we include an internal document, which is called a primary metadata document. What this is, it's basically a spreadsheet that we created in Excel, and my team fills out some initial information about the award. And we send that to the faculty member to see if she or he has any updates to provide related to that award. The information it eventually asks, and I should go back and say we use this form throughout the life of a grant or contract, but the information that we seek is publications and data repositories that are used by the faculty member to put their data. We'll talk about that a little bit more toward the end of this presentation, I believe. So we send a template email to the faculty member, we include a primary metadata document, and we also ask the faculty member if she or he is okay with us making the data management plan that they created at the time of proposal publicly accessible. And to be honest, I would say 100% of the time the researchers have said, yes, that's okay. So at that point, the faculty member would respond to that email by sending back the primary metadata document and letting us know whether it's okay to make the data management plan publicly accessible. And then my team will then forward that on to Betty again, and then we will fully set up the award. So one of the controls we have in place to make sure that we're compliant is we do not set up an award until we have the primary metadata document in place in the library. And then to make sure that we are doing this, we also have another control where each month I generate a report and I look at all new federal awards that have been received at the university. I go and look at the proposal documents and see if a data management plan was required by the sponsor at the time of proposal. Alternatively, I'll also look at the award documents and see if a data management plan is required as part of the award. If one isn't, we'll further go into the RFP, so the instructions related to the proposal, to see if something was required and we just somehow missed it. Or we'll go and look at the sponsor regulations to see if there's a data management requirement there. If not, then we'll note that on the spreadsheet. But what I do is once I prepare that spreadsheet, I send it to Betty, and then she also does a double check. And she'll let me know, hey, Kevin, you wrote that there wasn't a data management plan required on this award. You know, for example, this award came from the National Science Foundation, which typically has a requirement that a data management plan be included. Can you explain to me why that wasn't included? So we do a good job of communicating and making sure that, you know, things don't fall through the cracks. Betty, once she has the DMP and PMD, will then create a record to represent the award. And then she'll keep that record open through the life of the award so that the faculty member can then update it as needs be. So that's what happens at the time of the award, focusing on each subsequent year. So most awards, at least US federal awards, tend to be 3 to 5 years. Now that's not every award, but just generally speaking. So each year on the anniversary date of setting up the award, my office will send out a subsequent email to the faculty member and will include the PMD that we created and that the faculty member confirmed was correct at the time of award. We'll send an email with that PMD to the faculty member, and we have another template email that just says, hey, you know, it's been a year since you received your award. We hope things are going well. Just a reminder, there are some data management obligations mandated by the sponsor for this award. Here is your PMD. Please update it accordingly and send any updates to Betty, Rozum in the library. At that point, the faculty member can choose to update the PMD or not. It's his or her choice. But I would say we've had fairly good success with faculty updating the PMD. And what they would be updating it on is where if there were any publications, or usually with year one sort of data deposits is kind of what we would see most likely. Do you have?
Well, it kind of depends. The year one, sometimes they're not quite there yet. Year two, we get better response. You know, so it kind of depends. Sometimes we have to give them a little nudge, or I'll say, hey, you know, or they may not know quite yet. What does this mean? And so I just say, oh, just tell me what you published, or if you deposited data. And then they're like, oh, okay. Yeah.
So Betty will work with the researcher to verify that, you know, any updates that need to be made to the PMD are made in the institutional record. And then the library would make those updates as necessary. And then Betty finally would send me the updated PMD, and we would upload that into our Quali system. So when we send out the reminder the following year, we would have the latest version of the PMD available to send to the faculty member. And we continue this process every year until all data and publications are deposited, or 2 years after closeout. So we've had some awards that have recently been closed that we started with this process. And a couple of them are still open because we're waiting for verification from the PI that you know, all data and publications are deposited appropriately. So that's essentially our process. We start things at the time of award by sending out a notification email to the faculty member. We create a PMD that the faculty member can then update throughout the life of the project. We send reminders each year on the anniversary. I guess I said anniversary date earlier, but to be more correct, it's the anniversary month of the award setup. And then we will follow that until we receive confirmation from the PI that she or he has met her or his obligation, data management obligations to the sponsor, or it's been 2 years since the project end date. And you know, it's a process that we're still refining. Every now and then Betty and I will talk about what's going well and what isn't. But for the most part, I feel like we've created a process that at least allows us to feel comfortable that we're complying with sponsor mandates in terms of data management and open access. Now that said, we have faced a lot of challenges with this process, and maybe a lot sounds a little more grandiose than I intend it to be. But these are some of the challenges that we face in terms of following our process here at Utah State University. One of the challenges that we initially faced was not receiving a response from a principal investigator, researcher, to update the PMD. And we kind of found that initially, we all knew what a PMD was because we helped create it. We helped draft the policy and the procedures related to a PMD, and we knew how it was going to be used. We developed the template emails that would go out to faculty, and we thought we were fairly clear about what it was. But what we found out is that what was clear to us wasn't necessarily clear to the researchers. And so initially we didn't receive a lot of responses to the emails we sent out saying, hey, this is a PMD, please this is what it's for, please update it. And so we had to do a lot of follow-up, and this primarily fell upon Betty. Betty was the one following up with faculty to help them understand what a primary metadata document was at Utah State, how we used it, and what the data collected in the PMD would be used for. And I feel like since we've done that, we've gotten a much better response with faculty. We don't have to follow up as frequently as we used to. Sometimes faculty will just respond to the initial email on their own. If not, Betty will continue to do those follow-up emails. But in so doing, we've realized that we needed to adjust our template emails to be a little more descriptive and clear about what the PMD is and how we use it. One of the other challenges we face is record keeping. So as I stated earlier, we weren't given additional resources to implement this process. And so we kind of had to use the systems we already had in place and make them work for us as we followed the process. And in so doing, we realized that that maybe what we initially thought, the way we initially thought we could record data and keep track of it wasn't as user-friendly and helpful as we had hoped it would be. So that required some adjustment. So for example, in my office with the Quali database or the Quali system that we use, we the thought was we would go in, and there's a reporting section where we can put in due dates for reports that are due to a sponsor, such as annual reports, financial reports, technical reports, which I guess would be the annual report. And we thought, oh, we could go in and put a little timeline in there for data management and follow up on that. And that was okay, but what we found is there were some inconsistencies with the way people in my office were entering that data. So we've done some subsequent trainings to that to make sure that the way we're keeping our records is consistent. The way we're entering data into a database or into a record system is consistent. Third, how to handle closeout in the future. It's a fairly manual process when it comes to closing out an award. Our system only gets us so far. And so we require I expect people in my office to assist with this. And similar with the record keeping challenge that I mentioned earlier, we just found that based on people's levels of experience, they were doing things inconsistently because it's a manual process and it's not automated. There was that human error involved. And so we've been working on training to make sure that, you know, we're dealing with closeouts consistently across the board. Along with that, our systems require a lot of manual input. So there's a lack of automation for several steps. And we've kind of noticed those areas where there's a lack of automation tends to be an area where something could fall through the cracks. And so we've tried to account for that by implementing controls between Betty and me. So that is one of the reasons why I send Betty a monthly report of every new award we receive, so that she can go through and see if something kind of just fell through the cracks. I mentioned this earlier, training, you know, data management is just one area of compliance when it comes to receiving sponsored funding. And here in the US, every agency has, you know, requirements that we're expected to follow. And some of them are the same, but some of them are different. And so with that in mind, and there are a lot of tasks that the folks in my office have to do when reviewing a proposal and setting up an award, and then assisting with compliance to sponsor requirements throughout the life of an award. And sometimes, even though data management is a big deal, it's one area of compliance amongst many. And so sometimes it's difficult for people to remember. So that's why we've tried to do training to help people remember what they're supposed to do in terms of helping faculty comply with data management obligations. One of the ways in which we've done this is we've created an internal training document in my office that we review maybe once or twice a year at a staff meeting, just to make sure everyone understands the steps of setting up an award, what the areas of compliance are, and then when it comes to data management, what our role being grant and contract officers is to assist faculty.
Kevin, I'm going to let you know we have only about 7 minutes left,
okay.
and we have about 6 questions.
Okay.
So,
we will
right.
finish this up in the next minute or so.
Okay, great. Wonderful.
There's been some faculty confusion regarding the process and the PMD, as I stated earlier, and we've tried to clarify in our emails what the PMD is. And then limited resources. Betty's a one-person show in the library, and so she's doing everything for the library. In my office, I have 3 people that review proposals and submit them, but then I also have 3 people setting up awards. And really, those 3 people setting up the awards are the ones that have the main responsibility to make sure that we're complying with our data management obligations. So based on the Utah State probably averages between $100 and $110 million in funding each year. So having 3 people manage, you know, all the awards associated with that funding it's not a lot. We could use some more help, but we do the best we can with limited resources. To wrap up, a little bit about our initial outcomes in the next meeting, or in the next minute or so, and then the next steps, and then leave time for questions.
Yeah, so you can see this. We'll just go through this really quickly. We've set up 87 awards, and you can see that we've gotten through second year data and third year data on some of them. The downloads, we're getting a lot of these downloaded. We have a really tight collaboration now between the library and the research office. And I think that our faculty awareness of funder requirements and the resources available to them have really increased. And the relationships between the library, the research office, and the faculty have really improved. As far as our next steps that we're looking at doing, we'll keep collaborating. We collaborate a lot. We meet every month and have a meeting to talk about what we're doing. We're looking at developing an outreach and communication program to help clarify the process that we're doing. And the next thing that we have on our plate to work on this spring is to have some focus group with the faculty that are obtaining awards to determine what we could do to improve the services and the communication that we're doing. And this last slide just has the publication that Kevin mentioned, a link to our policy. And if anyone wanted to look at the funded research records, those are where the DMPs, the data management plans, are housed, and the data set records. Okay, now we can answer questions. Sorry that we get excited about what we do.
Thank you so much. This is very informative. I am struck by how the coordination between Office of Sponsored Programs and the library is going so well. And maybe that's part of when you went through the process of the policy, that building that relationship helped. Also, the detail for which your processes are, I think is very helpful. That's very practical from our standpoint. We have several questions, and I'm going to try my best to get to them. Claudia asked 2 questions. How many people were in the large group and how many in the smaller groups? And what were the topics of the smaller groups when you were developing the policy?
We had about 15 people in the large group, and the small group, I think we had 4 to 5.
4 to 5.
4 to 5. And
Great.
the second question, the small group topic. The small group topic, we mostly worked on developing that process where we have, when an award is funded, how do we go through tracking that? So the data management plan goes into the IR, there's a primary metadata document. So that whole process of notifying the PI, getting it set up, the annual reminders, just working through that whole process.
Yeah. And I think initially we looked at the OSTP memo to see what are we required to do. That was kind of the jumping off point.
Mm-hmm.
What are we required to do because we don't want to overregulate our faculty? And then second was what resources are available to meet these obligations. And then that's kind of where we jumped off into what Betty just spoke about.
We looked a lot at what resources we had. What were our existing resources? How could we leverage them?
Great. That's good. And then we had a question, Bololini. I'm trying my best to pronounce these names. What are the concerns around with the data and intellectual property rights?
That's actually a really good question. So if somebody has data that might come under intellectual property, we will tell them to talk to our intellectual property attorneys on campus and first have that cleared, because that data should not be released. We need to first protect that data, and that's actually, most agencies will have a clause for that, and it can be written into a data management plan. That data will be released if you have intellectual property, or if you're going for a patent, or there's some other reason you need to keep that data secured, you can do that, and you may want to do that for a period of time. So we encourage people to seek appropriate counsel for that.
Yeah, and there's a question I'm going to ask it, but I'm going to also think about what maybe another way of asking the question is. Referring again to the large group, how can you be registered in the large group or the smaller one? So maybe the question is how did you choose the large group and the smaller group that worked with the policy?
So the large group, we knew in that slide where we had the like the research office, the library, information technology. Then when we had those units from campus identified, we started picking people from those units. And then we started taking almost like recommendations from people. It was like, oh, well, this person should be here too because they have a vested interest in data. So we had our institutional review board person was there. We had
some prolific researchers on campus.
Yes.
So we looked at who are our faculty that tend to do a lot of research and tend to publish a lot and have a lot of data. And so we reached out to a few of them to have them sit on that large committee.
Great.
Yeah, it was really just who's going to give us the best input.
Right. That sounds great. Okay.
And the small group was really just who are the people who know these systems and who know how to make the process work.
Well, that's great. Okay, so I have a couple more questions. One is from Tim. Let me stop right now. We're past the hour, so we're going to finish up the questions. So if anyone needs to leave, that's okay, but we're going to continue on until we get the questions answered. So
yeah, and let us just say, we said this in the chat, but we will be posting this on the PUSH website. We'll be posting both the recording of the presentation as well as the slides.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Kara. And I appreciate you helping us do that. So Tim Hooper at Auburn is asking, has Utah State been tracking your annual DMP, PMD expenses? And curious to know how much this costs per year and if you're asking faculty to budget any of these costs into their respective proposals.
No, if you mean, are we tracking staff time? How much it takes in terms of staff time? No. It's like we said initially.
What about costs associated with storing the data?
Well, excuse me. We use our existing institutional repository, and so that's something we already had. So there's no additional cost to store it. There's my cost. So my position was, there's the cost of me for supporting all of data management on campus.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
In my office, we haven't heard any additional costs. It'd kind of be more in Betty's realm.
So, and I'm just kind of doing a little bit of what if, but if the data was being stored somewhere else and there was a cost to that, if it was an open repository and there was a cost to that, then is that built into the cost of the?
Well, some data is stored. Researchers have the option to store their data wherever it's best to store their data. And we just track that. So if they don't store it in our repository, they report to us and we create a record and point to where that data is stored, just so we know where it is.
Great.
If by chance there was a situation where, in terms of short-term data storage, it had to be stored elsewhere and there was a fee to it, if it was permitted by the sponsor, we would recommend including that in the proposal.
Okay. Great.
But I am not aware of that happening, but I could talk to my pre-award team and see if that's happening.
Okay, and going back to Claudia at Mississippi State, she asked when you were, she asked how supportive is your provost and your university president with this initiative?
Well, the university president was the provost when my position was created. So I'm assuming she's still supportive.
Yeah, we have a very supportive president and provost. They want Utah State to be a university that's known for doing things the right way, for being open and transparent and compliant. And so they've been very supportive of the implementation of this process. So supportive, in fact, that they really haven't come to us and said, hey, you guys need to change anything. They've allowed us to implement the process. They accepted the adoption of a policy, and getting a policy in place at Utah State, I'm sure it's similar with other universities, is it takes a while, right? A policy is hard to get implemented. A process, obviously a little easier, but they've been very supportive so far. And I think that's what's helped us is faculty are aware that from the top down, we're trying to create a culture of compliance here at Utah State. And so knowing that the president and provost are supportive of research and research compliance, I think enables us to do our job a lot easier than it would be otherwise.
Right, right. So I have a question. When we were looking at these different universities and then kind of following up and listening to what they have done around open data and data management planning and repositories, many of them are looking at hiring data management specialists. So you kind of moved your job, Betty, into that role and support role. Are you seeing where you need more support, more human resource support around this initiative? And are there plans to staff that?
I don't know that there's plans. I think that it would be helpful. I think data is growing on campuses. When I talk to faculty, more and more students are being educated on campus on how to manage data, use data responsibly. And I think that in academic libraries, that's going to be a bigger role for us. I don't know in our library that that's something we're prepared to do yet, because just like every other institution, you know, limited resources, lots of people have lots of things they want to do. What I try to do is just work smarter, you know, streamline everywhere I can.
Right. So there is a question around data and data repositories. I think it's really maybe meant for me, but thinking about data repositories and institutional repositories, what is kind of the attitude at Utah State around your institutional repository versus others? If an institution doesn't have a repository, a repository specifically for data, what might be some of your thoughts about them considering whether they should create one or not?
Oh, that's
That's too big of a question.
that's a big question. I mean, you know, the thing that's nice about having your own repository and somebody there who can help is that you can help. And a lot of faculty need that assistance. But there are so many repositories that you can go to and use and help faculty deposit their data to. Some are better than others.
Right.
At USU, many faculty love having our repository, and because they can come to me and I can sit with them and help them describe their data, format their data, do everything they need to do and get it deposited. So that's, and when we talk about those challenges early on, that helps them overcome that. And that may help them enough that later they would feel comfortable depositing in a different repository. But you have to have the resources to have a repository, whether it's a software service one like bpress or Figshare, or if you do open source one, you have to have the skills and the people to manage that. So that's a really hard question.
It is, and I think that's the person who put it in the chat was we were talking about maybe other webinars and other sessions to have, and maybe that in itself.
Yeah, that's like an hour-long discussion.
Right, or more, right? Okay. We are past our time. It's almost 10 after. I appreciate so much, both you, Betty and Kevin, your insights, and really appreciate what Utah State has done in tackling this idea of being data compliant with the funders, and then having a system in place that's so cooperative, particularly with the Office of Sponsor Program and the library. It's very impressive, and we appreciate you sharing your experiences here and just been listening to or looking at some of the comments in the chat, and there are other people who also are finding this webinar and your insight very helpful. So,
Oh, oh, glad it helps.
yes.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, and so we're going to close up, and we will be putting the video recording of this and the presentations on the pushtosign.org site under resources, and it'll take us a couple of days to get the recording up. So be patient. I will also let GoDan know, because they announced this in their system, and I'll let them know when that recording is up as well. Thank you all for your time and your participation in the webinar today.
Great. Thanks. See ya.
Bye-bye.